3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. Okay. Welcome, it is January 4th, 2024, and 5:34. I call the meeting of the Board of Directors for Lawrence Community Shelter to order. The first item on our, first of all, is everybody able to hear me? That's online. Can somebody give me a thumbs up?
Yes, we can hear.
Thanks, Brandon. All right, the first item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there anyone has anything different to add or change in the agenda?
I had suggested potentially a report on emergency preparedness, since I saw that staff had addressed that topic yesterday and didn't know if that's a possibility for us as a board or not.
I did send you that a note back, but I didn't hear back from you. Is it a, I wasn't familiar with the presentation about emergency
It
preparedness.
was, so the county emergency preparedness task force, board, whatever, has quarterly meetings, and we had talked at our operations meeting on Monday about aspects of emergency preparedness, both at the shelter and at the village. And I saw that apparently, I think Misty may have made a presentation yesterday in regards to that at the village.
Oh,
So
Jill raised her hand, so I think maybe she has something to say. Jill, you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, I wasn't at that meeting, but it was the monthly LEPC meeting. So it's emergency planning, emergency management, law enforcement, countywide, that all get together on a monthly basis. And we had pre-planned in advance for Mitch and Misty, Mitch Young with the city and Misty, to do a presentation about pallet shelter and emergency sheltering in general, and the approach that the city is taking as it relates to being an emergency management function. We've been engaging with the county's emergency management department over the last like 4 or 5 months as part of the strategic plan to develop an emergency management plan for unhoused folks. So first step in that was to work with the city team to develop the plan specific to the pallet shelter. So Robert Benecki, the director of the emergency management department, thought it would be a good thing to have Misty and Mitch just present and answer questions to all the emergency management and first responders at this past month's meeting. So that's really all it was.
Do you want to maybe put our meeting in the January 25th meeting, like as a study session topic? Would that be?
I think
Good.
I always think about severe
Sure.
weather in this part of the country coming in the spring,
Right.
and if we have vulnerabilities there, it would be good to know what how they should be addressed.
Yeah, we
Right.
can do that. We're still we're going to have our next check-in meeting with the project team on Monday. And Charlie, I just forwarded you a link to all the follow-up materials from the meeting today, if you want to look at that. But at a minimum, we could have like the emergency management department walk through how they've been trying to support the city team on developing those plans and see where they're at.
I think that'd be helpful. And I know in some conversations I had with Melanie over the last couple of months about emergency plans for the shelter itself.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of need for that work, and it doesn't sound like it's been really a area that they've done much with. So, you know, pandemic planning is one thing, but the more routine stuff like power outage, utility failures, those are pretty big and more likely to happen in the next, 12 months possibly.
Yep.
All right, well, we won't do it on the agenda tonight, but we'll put it up for our next meeting if we can get it scheduled. Is there anything else on the agenda anybody'd like to change, or we're good with? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Go ahead. I move we approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All right, the motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, motion passes. Our first item tonight is under reporting is Operations Committee. I don't know if one of you want to give us kind of an update on how things have been going.
I think Christine is gonna take the
Sure. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Happy New Year to all. So our operations team met in person on January 2nd of this week. Well, obviously this week, still getting used to the new year, but we met at 2 p.m. and our meeting lasted for about an hour and a half. It was at LCS, and that included Chuck, John, and Melanie and myself. Prior to that email, or prior to that meeting rather, an email including some things of points of interest and some references were sent out to Chuck and John. For this group, I feel like we're imperative to kind of get an understanding, get us all on the same page of what restorative practices could be used in as far as how we can strengthen relationships within the communities of our house's population. And so those were sent out in an email, but the discussion topics that we talked on further were just a few. We talked a little bit about low barrier and high barrier and the practices that were currently being implemented at Lawrence Community Shelter by the staff. And we talked about the current plan for supportive families with children requiring immediate winter shelter. We talked about a little bit about the in-house staff trainings that were as requested by staff, and then some that were going to be, I think, a good point to continue even after the emergency winter shelter plan was implemented. I think we all very much agreed wholeheartedly that we were going to not make any decisions, that this was just a plan to plan and get us on topic to talk about operations, especially with the emergency winter. But the plan really basically wanted to include James, as he will be entering and starting his first day of the executive directorship at Lawrence Community Shelter on Friday. So we really wanted to just make sure we had something in place where we were talking about winter shelter. So on those topics of discussion that I have shared with you, what we were able to understand was that the shelter has been occupying at capacity of 130 people this week. 100 were winter emergency, so there were comings and goings of people, but all were operating at full capacity of 130, and everything besides some of the things that we understand as far as the heat and the furnaces and the hot water, those have been recent, but everything else has been going and happening very well considering. But our plan was, to understand what winter emergency looked like. And so it looks as though the winter emergency staffing so far has been efficient. We talked a little bit about the pallet shelters, but there wasn't very much to talk on yet about that. And I think someone here, I think Chuck alluded to wanting to know more about the emergency procedures and this during severe weather. So that is an ongoing conversation. We found out that also families with children were utilizing a DCF grant or some fundings that were coming from the Department of Children and Families, where they could be placed in either a temporary hotel for, I'm not sure about how many nights, but there was also availability at the Lawrence Public Library for families in case of emergency winter shelter. So there is a system in place that works for families with children, and that was good to know. So we talked in length. This group really loves to speak on things, and I was here for it, but we only had an hour and a half. So the discussion was deep and broad, but I think what rose to the top, a discussion about, for me and for others maybe here as well, are storage during winter shelter months for the guests. There was little but not very much conversation on that, but that's to be continued, I'm sure, with James's influence as well. And then also really making an influence on how practices of low barrier and high barrier are looking, and because we've had a lot of conversations of what the difference is or what the distinction between those two are, and we found that there's many, and it's broad, but it's really very useful to know what locally works for Lawrence and what works for the Lawrence Community Shelter locally. We've got a plethora of information that comes from different counties on low barrier and why and what doesn't work. So again, utilizing the information that we have, and then also knowing that we have a very strong executive director taking ownership of a lot of these operations coming in tomorrow. We wanted to just make sure that we got a meeting on point and on the board. So our next meeting looks to be, and help me out, fellas here if I'm wrong, but the last week, or maybe the second to last week of January. And we hope to have James to be in a point at which he's comfortable to, know a little bit about the lay of the Lawrence Community Shelter by then to join in. But definitely wanted to include him in the next community or the conversation that includes operations. And Chuck and John, please fill in where I have left gaps in our conversation here.
I think you covered all the points pretty well, Christina. A little bit of confusion maybe on the next operations meeting. I guess I thought we were talking about sometime the week of the 15th of January, because Chuck, you were going to be not available.
Jury duty.
Yeah,
All right,
starting the 22nd.
correct.
Yeah, so I think we were toying with a date between Monday the 15th and Friday the 19th for that meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. I think Monday is absolutely not going to work
Right.
for me. I think I talked about that being a national holiday that's pretty important to me.
Right.
But
Right.
the following days in that week, you're right, we were talking about making another plan. But we also wanted to make sure that James was present, so we didn't really put something in
Yeah,
writing quite yet.
we didn't finalize. Yeah.
Any questions from anybody, or Chuck, did you have more to add?
I think Christina covered a lot of it. I guess, some of the other background I think that was there. I knew that we were hearing some distress about personnel and positions within the LCS organization, and I know there are aspects of that are going to prove to be difficult in the coming weeks, so.
Well, James actually is raising his hand, so James, if you want to chime in, please. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Think I can maybe do that. Maybe.
I know some of the other things, I'll kind of fill up a moment of dead air. We also talked about policies and the aspect of the board approving policies and the distinctions between policies and procedures on management and staffing level. So, looking to make sure that whatever policies are needed to be in place for
he's
Pallet
trying.
Village are well situated and ready to go.
Well, I think, I don't know, James, if you can figure out getting unmuted and getting on there, that'd be great. But if there's nothing else on the operations committee report, I'd like to move on. And then if you get there, James, we'll just jump back to you. If that's okay. Financial report, I really just had a couple of things. The last meeting, I believe, Melanie shared with us that the projected, she's kind of maintaining a pretty tight handle on our financial picture. And she had indicated we were good through like the middle of January. Well, then there was some additional expenses that were unexpected around, I think, probably the utility issues, the maintenance and stuff like that. But she has been able to get assurance from the city that they have it, their payment is scheduled on the next Tuesday city commission. meeting agenda, so if all that goes through, then we should be just fine in terms of, we'll get that first payment from the city, and as you know, that's significant boost to our bottom line, so if you had any concerns about that, it's all taken care of. The other thing under the finance report is the audit, the draft audit has been sent to us, and I don't know that we're ready to make any decision about it tonight, since it just arrived, and I shared it just yesterday. But I thought the exec committee could take a look at it more thoroughly, especially our treasurer. And then I asked them if they could meet with us at our next board meeting. Apparently, the person that would do the presentation isn't available. So they were offering either a different day this month or maybe in February. So I'll just continue to work on getting that scheduled. And I think that should take care of it. At this point, I think, it looks fine. My first glance of it, everything looked like financially, things are in order from the year 2022, so. And then the other things, the financial statements, eventually we do need to have those approved by the board, but I do feel like there's still a little bit of just due diligence that we might need from the exec committee before we bring that to the whole board for approval, so. And I think that can probably be done either the end of January or in February. Any questions on our finances? Anything you wanted to add, Rebecca? I don't know if you've.
I haven't had a chance to look at the audit.
Okay.
No, I think next is sort of related, right, with the
Yeah,
Kindred conversation, so.
Yeah, just so, looking through the audit, I didn't see anything that caught my eye or raised any flags, and,
Yeah.
Looking through all of the financials, it's obvious that things were getting very close to, critical,
Yeah,
looking at those monthly changes.
right.
So, yes, I'm glad that the organization is in much better shape now than it was 4 months ago.
Okay, looks like James is re-entering. Connecting to audio. I think you're good. Oh,
No,
got you on mute still. Well, we'll just take you whenever we can get you there, James. Next thing on our agenda is consideration of the accounting services agreement with Kindred. I sent this out with the board packet, and I think what I guess I'd entertain is just maybe a motion to kick this over to the exec committee. If we want to have any discussion, but that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point. A lot of things just feel like they need some time for us to look through it and study it, maybe consider whether we're gonna stay on the same course, so.
Yeah, I saw no deliverable.
Yeah, we also
Right.
recognize the fee wasn't on the attachment. So it just feels like it's actually not even queued up for us to make a decision about it tonight, and so I think simplest path forward would just be authorize the exec committee to finalize or to consider the accounting services agreement. And if appropriate, approve it. That would be,
So let me just clarify, are you saying you want it to go to the executive committee and execute it once we negotiate an
I-
acceptable agreement, or will? we
Yeah, I'm
wanna
thinking
bring it
that
back?
if the board would permit it, like to give that work to the three of us so we can get it done
Okay.
in, the next week or two. That way we don't have to wait for another board meeting.
Okay.
And if we decide that we need to take some more time, that's fine too. I just thought, let's at least give some authority to get this done before the 25th of January, if we see fit to do that. But it was another one of those, literally, we just got this agreement and questions I think are reasonable to have, so.
And I mean, and obviously we'll work with James too to see what,
Mhm.
what he's comfortable with.
Uh,
Would we sign that or would James?
I think it could be done by James, and I think that'd be fun. So,
Okay,
someone want to make a motion?
Yep.
To that effect?
so I'll make a motion that we table that item and refer it to the executive committee to negotiate an acceptable contract and thereby authorize the new executive director to execute it.
All right. Yep. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded to authorize the exec committee to consider the agreement and authorize the executive director to sign it if he sees that. Sound right? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say, or is there any other discussion about the motion? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any any opposed? Say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously. Next up is the funding agreement with Douglas County. And I asked Jill if she would maybe walk us through the agreement, and I believe. Oh, James, are you ready to go? I see you raised your hand again.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I am so sorry. It seems you have to accept the agreement to be recorded before you can unmute yourself, and I didn't do that. And
Oh,
so I finally did that, and I guess I can speak now. Thank you, everybody, for having me, and I'm so excited to be here. And I heard my name mentioned several times, and I am in agreement with everything. Christina, I do look forward to being on those meetings. I think being prepared for severe weather is very important, and I'm open to help develop plans, and so we can move forward with that. So whenever we schedule that, I'll be on board. No matter how caught up I am or am not, I would definitely be willing to come to the meetings and jump right in. So I'm all for that. I did briefly, I think we just talked about the Kindred proposal. And
Yes, sir.
you just said that I would be okay to sign that. I just looked it over and I just have some questions. I'm sure I can go over with Melanie to kind of answer some of the questions about our responsibilities and what she had previously set up. And I guess the cost of that arrangement and things like that. So I got a full plate of learning to do tomorrow, meeting staff, and that's on my list to kind of cover tomorrow. So I'll be more than happy to engage in that. So.
thanks, James. What we agreed to do is to refer it over to the exec committee. And so
Okay.
then you can get it ready for your approval.
Okay,
Okay,
that sounds good.
all right. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Okay, so then the next up is the county services agreement. And Jill, I have it queued up on the screen. You want to, I don't know how you want to walk through this, but
Sure. Well, I'll just say, this is the second year that the county has had a service agreement like this with the Lawrence Community Shelter. We started transitioning agencies that we've had funding agreements with, over to this agreement, about 5 or 6 years ago, starting with Bert Nash and DECA. And, it's outlined in a manner that rather than front loading funding that has been committed in the budget process, we request that agencies seek reimbursement. And I think we've talked about that in these meetings before, how that arrangement works with the county. We ask for, right now it's monthly reimbursement, but it's been a great format for us to utilize, just to get a little more accountability out of some of our partner agencies. That doesn't mean that agencies have not been accountable. It's just a better way to document how they're utilizing the funds. And when they seek reimbursement, we ask that they also prepare an outcomes report that accompanies that. each quarter or each month. So Lawrence Community Shelter, I mentioned DECA, Bert Nash, we have them with Heartland Radac, Artists Helping the Homeless, Jayhawk, AAA, Housing Authority. We have several of them where the expectation is that agencies are providing a service and we are reimbursing them for that amount. The only thing that's different between this agreement last year and this year is you can see Section 7, we talk about budget adjustments. If there's a request that funds are reallocated, we ask for that those adjustments be submitted between September 1st and 30th, and that we'll approve them before the 31st. And then some additional additions that we made to this from last year is Section 9 on cooperation and reporting. We added some information in there regarding designating staff. There's a lot of things that are outlined there, and I'm happy to talk about any of those. One that usually gets a lot of questions is provider agrees to utilize and contribute mutual client data via My Resource Connection. That's still kind of an ongoing conversation right now as it relates to Lawrence Community Shelter, because my understanding is the goal is that the data system that will be used is going to be almost exclusively HMIS in the future. And I have been seeking for a good amount of time having a data sharing agreement with the Kansas Statewide Homeless Coalition to have a data sharing agreement with My Resource Connection. And then our hope would be that we would have a couple of client facing LCS staff members trained to be utilizers of My Resource Connection, which, Charlie, I know you're very aware of what it is, but it's a HIPAA compliant user controlled care coordination data platform that the counties had in place with several of our human service and healthcare provider agencies since 2019. It's intended to promote care coordination, particularly with agencies like Bert Nash, DECA, LMH, Health Department, and others. And Heartland Health is on our list of agencies to get added, hopefully here in the next month or two, into my RC. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the terms in this document.
Thanks, Jill. I think the other important point is it's the 296,000 that was same as last year, and then
Yep.
There's a section in here about any vacancies and positions. I think I don't know how standard that is with the other agencies you're doing this with, but
that's a new one. That is actually a new one.
Okay.
And I think, we know it's going to be different for each agency about how that's reported, but agencies, while LCS wants to stay on a monthly reimbursement basis, a quarterly outcomes report is sufficient. So
Okay.
I think just figuring out if there's an average, vacancy in some of the classifications of positions, or just trying to hit the highlights of how many FTE were vacant versus filled, like we can figure out how to measure that and report that.
And I'm inferring that the intention there is just to better understand, like, our probably biggest expense is personnel. And if that budget item is kind of fluctuating or going down, then it kind of opens the question about how much funding is needed from the county, I guess. If a position lays vacant for 60 days, seems to be the concern.
Well, and 296,000 isn't gonna fund that many staff members, so I don't know if that's, like, if we're committing to report a lot that's not necessarily being funded by the county. Like, Jill, does the county need everything,
So
or just keep things?
I'll throw this out there, Jill, because the health department has a report, you know, our financial report to our board every month. And we report on our budgeted FTEs and what we're actually at every month. So it's
Ex-
really basic to be able to
Yes,
show, like, here's what we expected to do for the year, and here's where we're actually at, month to month to month. So it doesn't
yes,
get into much detail. It really just helps to explain, like, our personnel costs differing, or they're variable from or they're varying from what the budgeted amount was. So I was imagining it was something pretty straightforward like that, which would help us as a board also know, like, where are we at with personnel, at least at the highest level. You know, do we have 54 FTEs budgeted and we're only filling 40? That's a big
That's probably.
concern, right?
Yeah.
So that's the level of detail I was imagining we would need to see or know, and then that would
exactly.
probably be what would go to the county.
Well, and
Which-
quite frankly, I wouldn't mind having that every meeting
Right.
because I believe it's a safety issue
Yeah.
for us. And if there are too many vacant positions, then you really gotta think about how many people should be there.
That's a good
Yeah.
point. I mean, I think, so I know the attachment kind of leads you to think it's gonna be a lot of detail, but I think the point is the county's doing this to help monitor their use of their funds.
The
And we're
scope
not-
of work, and the scope of work too is almost exactly like the city of Lawrence's, except I removed reference to the village and the emergency and winter shelter. And I didn't mention this, I apologize. In what is unique in the county scope of service is the reentry beds. That's a carryover from this past year.
That's 5 beds.
It's three. I
Three
think
beds,
it's three, yeah.
Okay.
And that only is, so if, 3 beds that, if reentry is referred 3 people and those 3 people are still in those beds, then they don't have any room to refer anybody until those beds are freed up. But that's worked pretty well this past year.
I guess I do have a question in regards to the specificity of these agreements. So again, and this just betrays my lack of involvement in agency funding and reporting in that way. But so that section 7, where we're talking about budget adjustments, and we're saying that we shall not reallocate funds from the budgeted line items specified in the addendum. So for instance, at page 2 of the addendum, where we're talking about specific salaries and number of staff and things of that sort, is the detail of item 7 saying that if we deviate from those numbers of personnel or those compensation levels for those personnel, that we need to request in writing from the
I don't-
county?
I don't think it's that specific, Chuck. It's a good question, but the way how that applies to, and that's what's hard about these agreements is every agency that we work with is different and unique. And the way I interpret that statement is, especially as it relates to the Lawrence Community Shelter, is like, the expectation is that you're not going to use county funds to operate the pallet village. You're not going to use them, winter shelters a little mushier, but for all intents and purposes that you're keeping our funding dedicated to the things that are outlined in that scope of services. And I don't think we need to get down to, again, like pallet shelter staff, maybe that would be a line that I think would be outside of that scope of work.
Okay.
I also think, as you mentioned, that $296,000 is not gonna go far, so there isn't gonna probably be a budget adjustment in terms of, hey, we're spending more in this category. I mean, this is really to cover the cost of personnel. Just a portion of them. And then this is also what we did last year, right? In
Yes.
fact, what you see on there, this exhibit B is last year's version. So that needs to be
Updated.
updated before we finalize this. I think that's just, Melanie hasn't done that yet.
And honestly, what can be done at this point too is if you don't want to use any of the county funds for personnel purposes, just push it someplace else. And because some of our agencies, none of our funding goes to support personnel expenses. So that is blank. So it's up to y'all. If you just want to use it to offset all the other things that apply to the scope of services, that's fine. And that
Well,
makes it easier.
That's a very good point, because, when I look at the terms of the agreement, we're agreeing to have 3 meals a day, for instance. And it seemed like the line item that I saw in there, if indeed I saw a line item, yes, a line item in there for food of $8,000 for 3 meals a day for 100 people for a year. That's not gonna be in the range. So I could easily see that sort of a scenario where more of the expenses
Yeah.
associated with the supplies and materials, and not necessarily specifying. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying in terms of we want to make sure that the scope of the funding is going to county directed operations, not city directed operations.
Yeah, I mean, we want them to, the city is specifically asked the Lawrence Community Shelter to be the operator for the village and winter shelter.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the only thing that I keep separate. The other thing I wanted to mention is that here in the next 2-3 months, we'll be starting our budget process, the county's budget process for the next year. And this will be a nice reset to when the shelter submits its budget materials, you can narrow down what exactly you're seeking the county funding for if you want to, and simplify some of this a little more if we want to. It's just going to be a bit of a transition with this agreement this year.
So Jill, is the agreement, is that something we can change at this point in time in terms of the budget that was submitted for 2024?
Yeah, if we can
Okay.
do that now if you want to. I mean, then it's just the number. We can't change the number that you're the amount that you're asking from us. That's it.
All right. That's good. I was thinking it was kind of based on what was submitted last March or April, whenever that was turned in. So the total dollar amount is set in stone, but the rest of it we can change.
Well, and quite frankly, I think you might want to do that so that we're not having to cut up how much percentage of the salary is going to the city and how much to the county. It'd be way better to do food or utilities or something that is a for sure cost. And then accounting for it is
Simply.
simpler.
Yeah.
Well, Jill, is there anything else you wanted to share with us, or?
No, I'm
Okay.
just here for questions if you have
Okay.
them.
Are there any other questions? I feel like we're ready to make some decision on this. Okay. So I guess my thought is, and you're gonna say I'm an old record, but like, is this something we can kind of like do the city agreement, just ask the exec committee to get us to the finish line? Shannon's over there grimacing.
Well, what, I guess
Cause it sounds like we have to make some changes.
yeah, I mean, I think what we do is we redo the allocation attachment.
Yeah.
And then we authorize James to execute this agreement. I mean, I should disclose that I execute one of these all the time. And so I'm very comfortable with this agreement, so I may have a higher comfort level. But that, I think it's good for him to read it and to understand it. He can certainly reach out to any of us, Charlie or I think both, probably execute these
Yep.
type of agreements, and if he has any questions, but to sort of start. It's not very, the attachment is pretty much just exactly what we did with the city, so
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about that. So I would, basically authorize him to review it. Seek guidance on any questions and execute it.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
All right. Is there a second?
Second,
All right, the motion has been made and seconded to authorize the executive director to review, finalize and execute the funding agreement with Douglas County. Are there any other discussion on the motion?
Are we giving him enough guidance about like what we might want to see in the budget itself? Or,
I think we're authorizing him to do it and seek guidance from us if he needs it.
okay,
That's what I think I heard.
sounds good.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? Christina, you're not muted, so did you have something you
No.
wanted to add?
I don't
You're
have
just
any
ready to vote.
questions. I'm just ready to say aye. Just wanted to
Okay.
make sure
All
that
right.
was noted.
No other, just, James, you want to say something? Go ahead.
I'm like Shannon, I've executed a lot of these agreements over the years. I don't have any questions on the agreement itself. It's pretty standard. What would be, I've read it a couple of times. I just need to know the total budget so I can kind of identify what would be the best line item to put towards that amount of money so we can make sure that that's guaranteed. I won't have to worry about that, but I have to see the total funding and where everything's allocated in order to do that. But the agreement is pretty standard agreement. And if that's something that Jill and I can meet, then she can kind of give me some of the parameters or it says services. So I'm assuming anything that we do and we provide as services from LCS should be eligible costs for reimbursement. Am I correct with that, Jill?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything, so
Okay.
you could look at that scope of work and carve out like a handful of those things, like food costs, like even roughly like what it would cost to cover those 3 reentry beds. That might
Great.
actually be a really good starting point, is make sure you cover the provision of services for those 3 reentry beds.
That's specific to the county is what you're saying, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
And I'll get you set up when you're ready with the reentry director, and Melanie can do that as
Okay.
well, of course.
Okay. And I would like to actually familiarize myself with my RC. The work I've done with HMIS, there should be a way to do some uploads into Clarity to have that agreement. That's on my list too, to get with the balance of state to make sure that we become HMIS certified. We get enough people trained and that we're proficient in entering that data. I'd like to also know what data that you would like to be shared, and so I have a lot of meetings ahead to kind of get all that information. So
Absolutely. We'll get there. We'll get there when you're ready, when you got your head above water a little bit more.
okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Is there any other discussion on the motion? All right, then, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion passes. Next item on our agenda is executive session. I've taken liberty to draft a motion to put us into executive session. I had imagined maybe 30 minutes. So someone would like to make this motion, please?
I'll do it. I move that the board recess into executive session to discuss matters related to non-elected personnel pursuant to KSA 75-43-19 B1. The justification for the executive session is to protect the privacy interests of the individuals to be discussed. The board will reconvene in an open meeting in the Seal meeting room at 6:45 PM after the executive session is concluded.
Second.
All right, the motion's been made and seconded to go into executive session. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes. I am going to stop.
Are you taking any action afterwards
I don't think so.
or discussing anything else?
I don't think so.
Cool. Okay.
Have a good night.
I can't guarantee it. All right, let me this into a breakout room. Okay. We are back in the open session. And next item on our agenda is any board meet member items. I just threw this in there in case anyone has anything they wanted to bring up. Just a placeholder,
Not me.
nothing. Christine, are you still with us? Maybe not. I should get better at understanding how to use Zoom. All right, so future agenda items, I just tossed in your idea about the emergency planning for the village. Is there anything else that, I know we have the audit. I was thinking, the point in time count is coming up, and I asked if we could get a presentation on that. But apparently the next board meeting is the same day that starts.
Yeah,
So, Misty said, no, not this time.
So no.
But she'd be happy to do it at some point. I just think, as you continue doing this work as a board, I think we need to consider how do we educate ourselves about all this stuff, and probably a lot of the employees at the shelter could teach us a thing or two too. So like, there's employees there or others in the community we think would be helpful for us all to understand. And I think this, because our board meetings are public, our work sessions are public, it's an opportunity for the public to also learn something. So maybe it's thinking through like, what do we need to learn, but also what would be helpful for the public to gain some understanding about. Hopefully we serve that kind of dual purpose.
So are we thinking we'll just go to monthly meetings from here on out? Or,
We didn't have a future special meeting, so I think
Yeah, I think let's
I'm
go to
content with
regular
let's-
meetings and.
let's
Tell
take a
something.
pause on the special meetings, and unless James tells us we need to probably meet more often, or if you guys are feeling like we do, just let me know and we can pull something together, but are you feeling okay with that?
I think going to, the monthly last meeting or last
Yeah.
Thursday or fourth Thursday.
So the other piece on our agenda for January 25th would be the report from the Christina and Elizabeth on the advisory committee. Hopefully they're ready to give us something to act on that night,
Perfect.
so,
And that meeting on the 25th is at 5:30?
yeah. And it'll be at the library in meeting
Okay.
room C. I'll send out the calendar invite. I got the library for the next 3 months, so
Perfect.
January, February, March.
Is that the meeting room on the top level or on the bottom level?
On the bottom will be in C,
Okay.
then we'll be in A in February, and then we'll be back in C
Okay.
in March. Ideally, that's where we're gonna meet, because it's just, I think, more accessible for the public.
Sounds good.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All right, is there a
Second.
second? The motion's been made and seconded to adjourn the meeting. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Meeting adjourned.